Welcome to Accelerating Business Value Delivery with Behavior-Driven Development, Acceptance Test-Driven Development. Hello, I'm Ken Pugh. My focus is on BDD, ATDD, TDD, design patterns, safe, agile software engineering, which I co-authored, and the processes such as Lean, Scrum, Kanban, both doing training and consulting. I've got a few books out, including Lean, Agile, Acceptance Test-Driven Development, Better Software Through Collaboration. And part of this talk is from that book. So I have one overall rule. There are exceptions to every statement except this one. And what do I mean by that? When I say you always ought to do something, I don't mean always, but usually always. And when I say you never ought to do something, I don't mean never, ever, but usually never. So if there's something I say during this talk and you go, that's not going to work here, feel free to raise your hand with the exception, because we learn by the exceptions as well as by the rules. The second overall rule is context is everything. Everything exists in a context, and everything is always true in some context. Take Netflix, they do 15,000 deployments a day. They're producing videos. What could go wrong if that deployment doesn't work? Well, the watcher simply reloads the video. But if you're a financial application and you've just changed the way people buy stocks and it doesn't work, well, you've got a disappointed customer and maybe a Securities and Exchange Commission on your back. So context is everything. So let's take a look at the flow of business value. A business decides that they want to do a particular feature. Then you need to analyze the feature, get some details on it, make a design on how the implementation will work, code the implementation, test it, deploy it to the servers, and then finally execute it in production. And you get a flow from the decision to add a feature to its execution that actually delivers the business value. But it's not quite that simple. Sometimes you get loopbacks, test back to code with defects that start to pile up. Or perhaps it even goes from test back to analyze because the requirements were misunderstood. And finally, worst of all, maybe it's in production and you got to go all the way back with one more defect. That all slows down the flow of business value. So why do we have these flow issues? Well, no detailed requirements. Unclear business rules. In fact, many of the issues are the fact that business rules are not unambiguously specified. Poorly defined acceptance criteria. The defects hold up that deployment. You can't put it into production until you've solved those defects. Not enough testers. So, what's the cost of these defects? Well, if you have a requirement defect and you find it during requirement time, we're going to call that a 1. But if you don't find it till coding, that's a 4, because the developer has to pause, go back, check to see what the details are. And if it's not found until testing, that could be a 16, because now you got to write up a JIRA card, prioritize it, put in a backlog, and so forth. And worse, isn't found until production, that could be a 64, because now you've got to prioritize, stop work, make sure everybody's focused on putting the thing back in production ready. And it could even be worse values than that. So what is one of the reasons why we have these defects occurring? Because we have the customer, developer, and tester in separate silos. And what do we want to do? We want to take those silos and try and form a collaborative effort off them. And this collaborative effort, in fact, is what we call the triad: developer, tester, and customer. And the entire triad is responsible for the quality of the product. Now, This happens in both behavior-driven development and acceptance test-driven development. That the triad is going to describe the desired behavior of the system. And the customer side provides the requirements, the developer implements the requirements, and the tester critically analyzes the requirements and the implementation. Now, developer, tester, and customer, these are perspectives, not necessarily given roles or named roles. So here's the first rule in acceptance test-driven development, behavior-driven development. No code goes in until the test goes on. Not a single line of code till we have a test for that code. So let's just take a look at what are acceptance tests. Well, they're tests from the external view of the system. We have a user that sends an input into the system. Did the output, was that what was expected? Or state changes. The user is placing an order. Did the order go from in progress to submitted? Also, interactions with external services or with enterprise database. Did we send the right information to the service and get the right response back? Did we store the right information on the enterprise database? So let's take an example here. Here's a sample business rule. If the customer rating is good and the order total is less than or equal to $10, then do not give a discount. Otherwise, give a 1% discount. If the customer rating is excellent, then give a discount of what percent for any order? And if the order total is greater than $50, then give a discount of 5%. There's a business rule, so I have a question for you. What is a discount for a good customer and a $50.01 order total? I'll just give you a moment to think about that. So what did you come up with? Well, was it 1%? Was it 5%? Was it 6%? It could be any one of these, because in fact, this business rule was written to be deliberately ambiguous. You could come up and justify any one of those numbers. Now, nobody ever writes deliberately ambiguous business rules, but they often occur just by chance. So how do we clarify this business rule? Well, let's set up an example. So here's an example of the discount. Given an order total of $50.01 and a customer rating of good, when we compute the discount percentage, then it should be 1%. Now we have an example. We check with the customer and make sure that this business rule has been interpreted properly. And now the triad may get together and look at the other aspects of the business rule. Let's just make sure that $10 in good is supposed to be 0, $10.01 and good is 1%, and so forth for 1 cent for excellent, $50 for excellence, both produce a 1%, and it's a $50.01 excellent that does 5%. We have replaced misunderstanding with shared understanding. So let's just put this in a common ATDD BDD framework called Gherkin. Here's a scenario outline to compute a discount. Given the total is order total and rating is customer rating, when the discount is computed, then the percent is discount percentage. And we have a table that looks just like the table we had before. It's ready for automation. This table represents the shared understanding between all of the perspectives: developer, tester, and customer. Now, what's the difference between a scenario and a test? It is simply a check. Notice we said then percentage is discount percentage, and to turn this into a test, we're going to check that the percentage that is actually what we expected. So a scenario and a test. are just two sides of the same coin. So let's look at some term alternatives here. If what we really are doing is specifying an expected result, and our test is simply checking that what we actually get is equal to that expected result, well, it can be called one of two things. If the expected system state, or that output, that expected result, is a behavior, then the expected behavior drives development, and we get behavior-driven development. And yet, if we focus a little more on the fact that we're actually going to test the actual result against the expected result, then we have a test the behavior is acceptable, and we get acceptance test-derived development, which makes it acceptance test-driven development. They're just two slightly different perspectives on exactly the same underlying process. So let's take a look at requirements and tests. A failing test is a requirement. If you cannot ship a system with a test that fails, it is a requirement the system must meet. On the other hand, a passing test is a specification on how the system works. All the tests that are passing say, this is the way that this system has been implemented. So requirements and tests are interrelated. You can't have one without the other. And to help you remember that is just a little ditty.
Tests and requirements go together like a julep and mint. How they go together. You can't have one without the other.
Something to help you remember that tests and requirements are just two sides of the same thing. So what happens if we add our tests to our flow? Well, we still have the same decision part as to whether we're going to do a feature or not. But now when we do our analysis, we create our tests that we are going to use during our design to make sure that our design is testable, during our code to make sure our implementation is working correctly, and then our actual test is going to be just slightly smaller because we've done a lot of testing to that point. We'll deploy it with some tests to make sure that it's working, ready for production. And of course, we execute. And when we do this, we start to get rid of our loopbacks between test and code, and test and analyze. And that worst one, execute and analyze. And we get a much stronger flow of business value from the decision to actually executing production and delivering that business value. So let's see some results that have occurred. Workflows working the first time. Crisp, visible story completion criteria. You pass all the acceptance tests, the story is done. And we have the test then for the details of those requirements. Getting business rules right. One of the most important things and often a difficult thing to do. And rework goes down dramatically, and tighter cross-functional team integration. Those are results from people who have been doing BDD and ATD for a while. But let's look at a new team. 3 months after they adopted ATDD, the team happiness factor increased. There was more distributing testing effort across the entire sprint rather than at the very end. The lead developer and tester were much happier. And it helped create a we are the team feeling. Less stress on the testers. Fewer production and test environment defects. And finally, less rework due to eliminating that miscommunication. There you have it from a real team and real people. So let's just take a look at the difference between BDD, ATDD, and TDD. On the outside of an application, we have our developer, tester, customer triad that specify the external behavior of that application. And then inside, we have the internal behavior, where the developers, along with some testers, help design, code, and test the individual components inside that application that are going to produce that external behavior. Now, let's just take a look at this testing matrix. What we've been talking about are those functional tests on the left side there. The customer facing from the ATD, BDD. The technology facing from our TDD. Those are necessary but not sufficient to ensure a quality product. We also have what's on the right-hand side, the cross-functional test. The property test. Is something scalable? Is it secure? Does it give us high performance? And is it usable? The usability testing, which we need to test with real users, as well as to explore it, to see if there are any paths through the system that might produce some unexpected results. So in summary, BDD ATDD decreases loopbacks, thus increasing business value delivery. Thank you very much and have a good conference.